You ever sip something weird in the dark and wonder if it'll summon eternal love? Or a rash? Welcome to ancient Greece, where love potions were part science, part sorcery, and 100% terrible decisions in amphorae. From priestesses hawking aphrodisiacs made of goat bile, to philosophers dying lonely while ranting about soulmates. Greece was both the birthplace of rational thinking and bizarre, slippery romance hacks. Spoiler, these love potions rarely worked, unless your idea of success is tragic heartbreak, sudden exile, or mild diarrhea. Buckle up, lovers. It's about to get mystically awkward. Love history that's slow, weird, and secretly cursed? You're in the right amphora. Like, subscribe, and whisper sweet nothings to that notification bell before Zeus gets jealous. Let's set the scene. It's 400 BCE. You're wearing a scratchy linen tunic, sandals made of someone else's regrets, and you've just been ghosted by a shepherd with perfect calves. You're standing outside the temple of Aphrodite, clutching a terracotta vial, filled with what smells like fermented oregano and something that might once have been a snail. You're told it'll make him love you forever, or at least until the next harvest. Congratulations, you've just entered the aphrodisiac apocalypse, a time when love was less of a feeling and more of a chemical reaction mixed in the back room of a suspicious apothecary with a squirrel problem. Because here's the thing, in ancient Greece, romance was messy. Beautiful, sure, in a bronze and poetry kind of way. But mostly, it was weird, transactional, ritualistic, and wildly confusing. And when people didn't know what to do with their feelings, they turned to the next best thing. Magic disguised as medicine, or medicine disguised as magic. No one was quite sure, especially not the guys brewing it. See, love, that fluttering, chest-tightening, bad decision-inducing force, wasn't considered a harmless spark. To the Greeks, it was more like an affliction. You could be struck by love, possessed by it, even cursed by it. Poets called it madness. Philosophers called it an imbalance of bodily fluids. And average Athenians? They just called it Tuesday. Now let's be clear, we're not talking about Hallmark card, Nicholas Sparks kind of love. We're talking the kind that makes you steal a lock of someone's hair, bury it under the full moon, and chant to a minor sea deity named Thalasophoros in hopes that your crush will make eye contact at the olive press. But how did it get this way? Well, start with a deeply spiritual society obsessed with the gods, fate, and omens. Add in a sprinkle of drama. This is Greece after all. A dash of misogyny, and a whole lot of unregulated herbs, and you've got the perfect storm for potion-based emotional disaster. Love magic, or erotica pharmaca, if you're feeling fancy, was the DIY relationship counseling of the ancient world. You had your agonizing desire potions, meant to make someone burn with longing. You had your erotic binding spells, which usually involved lead tablets, grave dirt, and a general disregard for consent. And of course, the old standby, seduction drafts, most of which could also be used to clean amphorae in a pinch. One particularly popular blend involved mixing wine with nettle, honey, and the ashes of a dove. Romantic, right? Nothing says be mine like drinking bird dust while chanting in dactylic hexameter. What's that, you ask? Did any of this actually work? Well, define work. If your goal was to make someone slightly lightheaded, mildly nauseous, and temporarily receptive to compliments, then sure, success. But if you were hoping for long-term devotion, deep emotional connection, and shared domestic responsibilities, you were better off praying to Hera and crossing your fingers. Still, these concoctions weren't fringe weirdness. They were everywhere. Love potions were sold openly in marketplaces, whispered about in back alleys, and casually included in women's household knowledge, right between how to spin flax and how to survive childbirth without anesthesia. You could learn a love spell from your neighbor, your priestess, or that one guy who claimed he saw a satyr in a fever dream, and came back with the ultimate lust recipe. And of course, where there's magic, there's panic. Enter the philosophers, stoics, skeptics, and killjoys of the ancient world. They hated this stuff. Plato warned that unchecked desire could unravel society. Aristotle called love potions unmanly. Socrates just refused to bathe and yelled at people in public, but we assume he had opinions. To them, real love was a spiritual, intellectual bond, not something you could bottle, chug, and burp your way through. But as usual, the masses didn't care, because when you're heartbroken and lonely and living in a world where your dating pool consists of your cousin, your cousin's cousin, and a guy named Diodorus who smells like goat, you try stuff. And sometimes, stuff gets weird. Take the story, completely real and totally not made up, of Callista of Corinth. She was said to have been so beautiful that men fought duels over her. Desperate to avoid a fifth wedding, she drank a love-repellent potion meant to ward off suitors. It worked a little too well. No one ever spoke to her again. Her cat even moved out. It was said her potion included garlic, crushed beetle wings, and a chant to Hecate performed in reverse, while balancing a frog skull on a spoon. Ancient Greece didn't really do casual dating. They did eternal spiritual bondage, or social ruin, nothing in between. So why did love potions become more popular than actual marriage vows? 'Cause vows are boring. They require mutual respect, legal witnesses, and occasionally understanding one another's feelings. Love potions? They're mysterious. They're dramatic. They're a way to pretend the universe is intervening on your behalf. They gave power to the powerless, especially women, and control to those who felt overlooked. They turned something chaotic and painful into something you could stir, sip, and hope for. But here's the truth they never admitted in the temples or marketplaces. The people buying love potions weren't trying to manipulate others. They were trying not to feel helpless. Because love, whether in 400 BCE or right now, makes us ridiculous. It makes us reckless. And sometimes, it makes us believe in magic, even when we know better. So next time you light a candle, send a risky text, or wonder if that crystal your ex gave you actually cursed your dating life, just know you're not the first. You're part of a long, strange, mildly toxic tradition. And this is just the beginning. Let's talk about branding. Because before Apple had a fruit logo and Coca-Cola sold happiness in a can, there was Aphrodite, ancient Greece's most seductive export, and the unofficial mascot of romance, lust, and generally bad decisions involving olive oil. Aphrodite wasn't just a goddess. She was an aesthetic, a vibe, a lifestyle package. Want beauty? She's got it. Fertility? Sure. Maritime safety? Weirdly, yes. She even had her own skincare line. It involved seafoam, pearls, and probably goat tallow, which, honestly, tracks. But where there's beauty, there's business. And once the Greeks had finished turning Aphrodite into a divine symbol, they got straight to work commodifying her. Because what's the point of a love goddess if you can't bottle her? Enter the Aphrodite formula, a loose term for the endless wave of potions, perfumes, wines, and oddly scented pastes sold in her name, all promising to unlock irresistible charm. Think of it like the ancient version of Axe body spray, except instead of locker rooms, you had open-air temples, and instead of insecure teenage boys, it was, well, insecure grown men wearing togas and sandal tan lines. Let's start with the ingredients. First up, honey, symbol of sweetness, fertility, and probably the ancient Greek version of edible lingerie. Honey was everywhere in these formulas. Stirred into wine, smeared on statues, rubbed on the neck like a poor man's Chanel number. Aphrodite herself was sometimes called Melissae or honeybee, which sounds sweet until you remember bees sting, swarm, and occasionally die during sex. Metaphor much. Next came cinnamon, imported, exotic, and absurdly expensive. It was believed to heat the body, stimulate desire, and mask the smell of living without plumbing. Combined with myrrh, saffron, or cardamom, it formed the base of early love perfumes. Some historians believe these formulas were so concentrated that one sniff could knock out a goat, which incidentally may explain the goat population dip around 3. And then, garlic. Yes, garlic. Because nothing says let's get steamy like breath that could ward off both vampires and Hades himself. Believe it or not, garlic was considered a symbol of bold, aggressive passion, the kind that didn't bother with subtlety. If honey was the invitation, garlic was the door slam, used sparingly in wine and even burned as incense. It was meant to provoke the body, awaken courage, and perhaps clear the room for some privacy. But the crown jewel of weird ingredients? Leeks. Oh yes, leeks. Tall, awkward, onion-adjacent vegetables that scream, "I'm not sexy, but I try hard." According to certain love manuals, and yes, those existed, leeks were believed to stimulate lust when cooked into stews or ground into paste, and applied, well, strategically. Why? No one knows. Maybe it was the shape, maybe it was the earthy aroma, or maybe someone once got really lucky after eating leek soup and just ran with it. Reflect for a second. Imagine showing up on a date today with a leek smoothie. You say nothing, just hand it over and wink. That's what we're working with. But these concoctions weren't just about ingredients. They were about ritual. Mixing a love potion wasn't as easy as throwing herbs in a jug and yelling abracadabra. No. You had to time it with the lunar cycle, chant the right invocations, and sometimes whisper your beloved's name into the brew 3 times while walking backward. Extra points if you didn't trip over your own toga. One popular love wine recipe reads like the worst cocktail menu you've ever seen. Red wine, dried rose petals, fig syrup, powdered dove hearts, and a dash of menstrual blood. Served warm, ideally under a fig tree, during a full moon. Romantic in a very how did we not die as a species kind of way. But here's the kicker. This wasn't fringe pseudoscience. Physicians, real, respected ones, often endorsed these blends. Hippocrates, the so-called father of medicine, had strong opinions on passion-inducing foods. He believed warm, moist ingredients stimulated the reproductive organs, while cold, dry ones dampened the libido. So yes, in a weird twist, the guy who gave us the Hippocratic Oath also accidentally gave us horny soup recipes. And of course, where there's demand, there's supply. Enter the potion peddlers, a mix of priests, midwives, amateur herbalists, and con artists. With excellent robes, they set up shop in agora stalls, temple courtyards, and dark alleys behind bathhouses, hawking jars of oil, vials of syrup, and things in animal bladders that definitely weren't FDA approved. Their marketing? Divine. Let Aphrodite's breath touch your skin. Burns away shame. Ignites desire. Guaranteed to melt hearts or mildly irritate skin. Refunds not available. In truth, the whole operation ran on hope. People bought these mixtures not because they worked, but because they wanted them to. Because love, especially unrequited love, is desperate, lonely, and irrational. And, when you're spiraling at 2 a.m. thinking about a blacksmith who doesn't know your name, it makes perfect sense to rub yourself with leek extract and pray to the moon. Let that sink in. These were human beings, thousands of years ago, navigating the same mess we do now. Ghosting, infatuation, loneliness, sexual tension, the constant urge to make it mean something. They didn't have dating apps or couples therapy. They had herbs, gods, and a whole lot of emotional guesswork. And maybe, just maybe, that's why leeks felt magical. Not because they worked, but because they gave people something to do. A way to fight back against the ache. A way to say, So yes, Aphrodite was a brand, a myth, a goddess. But more importantly, she was a mirror, reflecting all the desire, awkwardness, and wildly ambitious vegetable smoothies that humans have been using to chase connection since the dawn of time. And the truth? Nothing's really changed. We still crave shortcuts to love. We still believe in formulas. We still think maybe, just maybe, the right mix of sweetness, spice, and courage will make someone look at us differently. But what happens when the formula goes too far? Here's a fun fact. The Greek word for witchcraft and the word for pharmacy are the same. Pharmakeia. Sounds enchanting, right? A little mysterious. Maybe even wholesome, until you realize that, in ancient Greece, the line between medicine and malevolence was not so much a line as a wine-stained smudge on a clay tablet. See, the Greeks had a habit of naming things after their effects. So anything that altered your state of being, whether it cured a fever or made you fall hopelessly in love with your neighbor's sculptor, counted as pharmakeia, healing balms, hallucinogenic herbs, paralytic poisons, aphrodisiacs, made from pickled insects, all under one convenient, suspiciously murky umbrella. And just like that, love potions entered the same category as rat poison and funeral rites. Now, don't get me wrong, not all love potions were deadly. Most were just disgusting, but every once in a while, someone added a little too much datura, or forgot that slight increase in heart rate becomes complete cardiac arrest at double the dose, and suddenly, the ancient equivalent of a crush turned into an involuntary funeral. Let's paint a scene. It's a warm evening in Thebes. A noble woman, let's call her Damaris, is head over sandals in love with a young poet who writes epic verse about goats. She buys a love elixir from a traveling herbalist, a little wine, a pinch of henbane, and something the vendor only describes as moon root. She slips it into his cup. He takes a sip. She waits for eye contact. Instead, he makes a low humming sound, and falls face first into the fire pit. No more goat poems. Was it a crime of passion? Or just really bad dosage? Hard to say, but one thing became clear. Love potions weren't just awkward, they were dangerous. And sometimes they were deadly. Enter the legal system. Greek city-states weren't exactly chill about pharmakeia, especially when it involved suspiciously timed illnesses, sudden deaths, or men behaving emotionally, which, naturally, had to be magic. Women were the usual suspects, because who else would want to control love? They reasoned, except someone who wasn't allowed to own property or initiate divorce. Case in point. Theris of Lemnos. Theris was a midwife, healer, and according to her enemies, an expert in poisonous charms. Her name appeared in Athens court records around 370 BCE, accused of crafting harmful brews, casting illicit spells, and generally disturbing the status quo. One source claims she made a love potion so strong it caused a man to abandon his family, move into a cave, and start worshipping a singing tree. Honestly, same. But Athens wasn't having it. Theris was arrested, put on trial, and executed, burned, if some accounts are to be believed, along with her entire household. Her crime? Corrupting the minds of citizens with enchanted substances. Translation: she gave someone feelings, and those feelings made society uncomfortable. This wasn't an isolated incident. Dozens of cases like Theris's are buried in legal speeches, tragedies, and dusty scrolls. Women, especially healers and foreigners, were regularly accused of using potions to seduce, manipulate, or eliminate. Love, in these cases, wasn't romantic. It was strategic. A tool of power, a threat to social order, wrapped in a bouquet of herbs and whispered prayers. And yet, people still used them, openly, secretly, desperately, because love, unlike the Athenian courts, doesn't care about legal precedent. It's irrational. It doesn't read the fine print. And when you're powerless, a woman, a servant, an outcast, a bottle of sweetened wine and dried mandrake looks a lot like agency. The problem, of course, is that agency looks suspicious when you're not supposed to have it. There's a chilling overlap here between admiration and accusation. A woman mixing herbs to ease childbirth. A respected healer. A woman mixing herbs to spark affection. A corrupting sorceress. The ingredients might be the same. The intention? Only a matter of interpretation. It raises an uncomfortable question. Where do we draw the line between chemistry and coercion? Between healing and manipulation? And is love, already such a wild, destabilizing force, ever truly free of influence? These are not new questions. Even in ancient times, thinkers grappled with the ethics of desire. Was it noble? Was it base? Could it be pure, if sparked by a potion? Did it matter if the end result felt real? There's a certain irony here. The very society that condemned love magic was also one that worshipped Aphrodite, romanticized obsession, and believed in literal arrows of passion fired by winged toddlers. They wanted love to be sacred, just not inconvenient. They wanted desire, as long as it followed the rules. They feared manipulation, unless it was by a god. And so, potion makers became scapegoats. Convenient targets in a world desperate to control the uncontrollable, because love, in all its maddening, breath-stealing, occasionally fatal glory, didn't fit inside courtrooms or moral codes. But people still tried to drink it, bottle it, sell it, blame it, banish it, tried to explain why one man abandoned his family for a stranger, why another carved names into temple walls, why a woman, alone and aching, might light a candle and stir a mixture, not because she wanted power, but because she wanted not to feel invisible. The border between love and poison was never clear. It still isn't. So the next time you think about a bad breakup, a wild crush, or that one time you sent 14 texts in a row, remember Theris, remember the moon route, and remember that we've always been this messy. Because in the end, every love story contains a little pharmakeia. You know, that guy who downs 3 protein shakes before a first date, and then wonders why he feels like his stomach is bench pressing itself. Ancient Greece had that guy too, except instead of whey and pre-workout, he was guzzling mandrake root, the original performance-enhancing, potentially scream-inducing plant of choice. Yes, mandrake. The plant that looks vaguely human, shrieks when pulled from the ground, according to legend, and smells like a wet sock filled with regret. But to the ancient Greeks, it was the love root. Equal parts aphrodisiac, fertility charm, and blackout elixir. Basically, if you wanted passion, potency, or to hallucinate that your crush was a nymph, Mandrake had you covered. But like most things in ancient medicine, the line between dose and disaster was razor thin. Let's rewind a bit. Mandrake, or mandragora, if you want to sound like a wizard, was a Mediterranean herb with forked roots shaped vaguely like the lower half of a person, because nothing says romance like a root that resembles a tiny contorted man doing jazz hands underground. This humanoid resemblance gave Mandrake all sorts of mystical street cred. People believed it had a soul, that it could cry, that you had to trick it out of the soil by tying it to a dog and letting the poor creature yank it loose, usually with fatal consequences for Fido, which is both horrible and wildly inefficient farming. But if you could get your hands on it, and didn't mind the whole death by root scream thing, Mandrake was prized. In tiny amounts, it was a sedative, a relaxant, a gentle euphoria booster. In larger amounts, it was a hallucinogen, a libido enhancer. And in a let's not talk about what happened at that symposium kind of dose, it was a one-way ticket to unconsciousness. Or worse. Greek physicians and philosophers wrote about it often. Theophrastus, the botanical gossip columnist of the ancient world, described how Mandrake could provoke love if used correctly. He didn't specify what correctly meant, but he did include steps for harvesting it under the right moon phase, because obviously plants only get romantic under a waxing gibbous. One early love spell involved soaking mandrake root in wine, whispering the name of your beloved into the jug, and drinking exactly half, giving the other half to your target. If both participants drank, the theory went, their spirits would become bound by shared madness, the kind that leads to passionate embraces, or interpretive dance, or mild seizures, and inevitably someone always overdid it. Enter the tale of Euphranor, a minor nobleman from somewhere near Argos, and an enthusiastic mandrake enthusiast. According to a scroll fragment that may or may not be apocryphal, Euphranor wanted to impress a local temple maiden, the kind of woman who carved poems into olive trees and thought eye contact was foreplay. So naturally, he turned to love science. He brewed a potent batch of mandrake-infused wine, sweetened with pomegranate syrup, and added a pinch of powdered myrrh for stamina. He drank the entire thing himself, apparently forgetting the part where you share the potion. The results? Well, according to temple gossip, he staggered into the courtyard, proclaimed eternal love to a marble statue of Athena, tried to kiss it, fell over, and passed out in the ornamental fish basin. He remained unconscious for 3 days, and awoke convinced he was part horse. The temple maiden married someone else. The statue was later scrubbed. There are worse first dates, I guess. Stories like this weren't uncommon. Mandrake was potent, unpredictable, and wildly misunderstood. People used it in incense, oils, bathwater, and of course, swallowed whole, like ancient love gummies. But without proper knowledge, which was basically everyone, it was more likely to induce confusion than romance. And yet, people kept using it. Why? Because Mandrake was symbolic. It embodied mystery, power, the fantasy that you could hack your own heart. That with the right plant, the right words, and a little lunar alignment, you could skip all the awkward conversations and just feel something deeply, wildly, irrationally. The Greeks weren't idiots. They knew love could be dangerous, but they also believed that danger made it real. And Mandrake, with its uncanny shape, its sedative powers, its mythic howl, captured that contradiction perfectly. It was both attraction and risk, desire and disorientation, aphrodisiac and cautionary tale. So when men drank too much Mandrake, it wasn't just because they wanted to impress someone. It was because they wanted to believe that love was more than awkward banter over stale bread, that it was mystical, preordained, rooted in something older than reason. Let that sink in. Every time someone chewed a slice of Mandrake hoping for divine attraction, they weren't just chasing pleasure, they were chasing proof. Proof that feelings could be summoned, that fate could be stirred, that love, however fleeting or dangerous, could be made. Of course, today we call that manifesting, or maybe day drinking and texting your ex. But the impulse? It's the same. Desire makes us reckless, makes us mix things we shouldn't, makes us believe a plant with limbs might be the key to unlocking someone else's heart. And maybe, if we're honest, we all have our mandrakes. So the next time you think of ancient Greece as all stoic statues and heroic poetry, remember Euphranor, passed out in a fish basin, mouth stained with syrup, whispering sweet nothings to a statue. Because in the pursuit of love, we're all just a little bit ridiculous. Once upon a time, or perhaps twice, depending on which dusty fragment you read, there lived a woman named Melite, and a man named Aegon. Two names now buried in the margins of a forgotten scroll, two hearts undone by a cup of sweetness that soured everything. This wasn't a myth. At least, not entirely. Melite and Aegon weren't gods or heroes or monsters. They were human. That rare and cursed variety of human who believed they could outsmart love by brewing it. And like all good tragedies, it started with longing. Melite was not what Athens considered a proper woman. She was educated, sharp-tongued, and uninterested in the matrimonial game of dowries and dull dinners. Instead, she studied herbcraft, not the fluffy kind, the real, grimy, root and blood kind passed down from priestesses and outcast midwives. She believed plants had language, rituals had rhythm, and feelings had formulas. And then came Aegon. A soldier. Which sounds noble until you realize most soldiers at the time were just well-armed citizens with commitment issues. He was tall, sunburnt, slightly chipped in the nose, and had the quiet intensity of someone who had seen both battlefields and bad poetry readings. They met during a spring festival. Wine flowed. The music was bad. Someone juggled fish. It was, as far as Athenian festivals go, incredibly romantic. Melite, despite herself, felt something stir. The trouble was, Aegon didn't. Not at first. He was polite, cordial. He complimented her olive preparation, but his eyes were elsewhere, on a younger girl, simpler, more agreeable, and alarmingly fond of goats. Melite watched this unfold, the way a scholar watches an idiot misquote Homer, with horror, fascination, and a growing need to intervene. And so she did what no rational, heartbroken woman should do. She went to her herb shelf. The potion she brewed was subtle. No mandrake, no bile, just wine infused with rose petals, a pinch of saffron, honey, and something called crocos dust, rumoured to amplify affection if shared between two people under starlight. She added a charm, a whisper, and maybe, just maybe, a tear. Aegon drank it, willingly, smiled, then drank more, and for a while, it worked. He returned to Melite the next evening, and the next. He spoke in verse, he brought figs, he kissed her fingers like they were sacred texts. He looked at her, really looked at her, and she felt, for the first time in years, chosen. But the thing about feelings brewed in bottles is that they don't last. Not in the way you hope. By the end of the second week, Aegon had changed. He was still present, still affectionate, but it rang false. He repeated phrases she hadn't said. He smiled at things that weren't jokes, and sometimes, in the middle of a sentence, his eyes glazed over, like he was reciting lines written on the back of his mind by someone else. The potion hadn't made him love her. It had made him obedient. Melite tried to undo it. She brewed antidotes, cancelled incantations, wrote apologies in rose oil, and prayed to Aphrodite until her throat cracked. But Aegon only grew worse. He stopped sleeping. He flinched at music. He muttered her name when no one was near. One night, he carved a heart into the temple wall using his own belt buckle. Inside it, her name, but upside down. That was the night he vanished. Some say he drowned himself in the Aegean. Others say he wandered into the forest and married a tree that looked like her. Melite never knew. She was questioned. Suspicious glances followed. No charges were brought, only whispered. She left Athens soon after, retreating to a coastal village where no one knew her. She stopped making potions, burned her notes, buried her herb, and never loved again. Now, was Melite real? Probably not in the had a voting record and census entry kind of way, but her story appears in fragments, in temple graffiti, in herbalist manuscripts, in one play that was performed once and then banned for romantic misconduct. So maybe she was real enough. Because her story, it's not unique. It's the cautionary tale stitched into every whispered spell, every hopeful draft, that love forced is not love earned. That desire conjured without consent curdles. That the heart, once tampered with, becomes a stranger. Melite's tragedy wasn't that she used a potion. It's that she thought she needed one. And that's the uncomfortable mirror this chapter holds up to us. Haven't we all at some point wished for control? A shortcut? A way to guarantee affection without the risk of rejection? Swipe right, send a thirst trap, read a listicle called 7 Foods That Make You Instantly Attractive. Number 5 is nuts. Deep down, we still think love can be engineered. But Melite reminds us what happens when you try. Aegon became a puppet. She became a ghost. And the love they briefly held dissolved, not in passion, but in silence. Let that sit for a moment. Because not every story about love potions is funny. Some are soft tragedies, quieter than myth, louder than fact. They linger not because they shocked, but because they understood something about the ache of wanting too much. So the next time you hear about a potion that promises adoration, desire, or devotion in 3 easy sips, think of Melite, think of Aegon, think of how easily enchantment becomes a cage, and how some hearts, once captured, never come back. Picture it, a dim stone chamber tucked behind a bathhouse, smelling faintly of thyme, burnt feathers, and social rejection. A lone man in a linen robe crouches over a bronze cauldron, muttering to himself, stirring something thick, green, and vaguely pulsating. He's not trying to create gold. No, he's trying to make someone like him. Welcome to the misunderstood world of the lonely alchemists of Athens. The original nice guys who believed chemistry could literally make chemistry. They weren't your flashy love potion street vendors with chants and goat skulls. No, these were quiet, peculiar souls, men, and occasionally women, who weren't especially attractive, particularly wealthy, or especially charming, but who were really good at identifying plant species by smell. People who lived for scrolls, formulas, and the fantasy that maybe, just maybe, desire could be distilled into a tincture if you just boiled the right root for the right number of hours. These were the proto-chemists, precursor pharmacists, experimental romantics who believed love could be measured. They called it emotional distillation. We call it trying way too hard. Athens was the perfect breeding ground for this type of obsession. A city packed with philosophers, poets, and men deeply afraid of eye contact. You had symposiums where debates about love turned into drunken rants, and temples where worship meant whispering your secrets to a marble statue. It was a place bursting with emotion and completely allergic to emotional vulnerability. So when the alchemists couldn't flirt, they formulated. Let's meet one of them, Epatides. He doesn't appear in any of the major texts, but his name pops up in a few back-alley papyri, usually followed by the phrase, smelled like pickles. Epatides believed that romantic attraction was a chemical imbalance, something that could be corrected with the right herbal extract. He worked tirelessly in his home lab, testing combinations of rosemary, pomegranate rind, and fermented fig milk. His most promising invention, the love balm he called Eros Essence. According to one surviving recipe, it involved soaking mint leaves in lamb fat, adding powdered rose quartz, and whispering the name of the intended partner into the mixture while fasting. It smelled like regret and vaguely floral soap. No record survives of whether it worked, but considering the balm was described as greasy with a note of meat, we can assume no hearts were won. Then there's Anthemon, a self-proclaimed herbal psychologist who built an entire theory around the balance of aromas. He believed people could be paired by scent compatibility. One scroll describes his attempt to match 2 widows by giving them both a tea blend of licorice root and crushed apple skins. They reportedly shared a moment of mutual blinking, then never spoke again. Let that sink in. These weren't hacks. They were hopefuls. They weren't trying to manipulate, control, or deceive. They were trying to understand love through observation and trial and error. They were, in their own awkward mortar and pestle way, scientists of the heart. Of course, Athens being Athens, the mainstream philosophers mocked them mercilessly. Plato called love divine. Aristotle thought it was rooted in friendship and moral excellence. Diogenes thought everyone should just get over themselves and bathe occasionally. None of them had patience for men trying to seduce with experimental ointments. But that's the cruel irony, isn't it? The same society that philosophized endlessly about love refused to teach its people how to experience it. You could take a class on rhetoric, logic, and ethics, But God forbid someone just tell you how to ask someone out without involving a goat sacrifice. And so the alchemists toiled in secret, mixing, testing, failing, not out of malice, but because they were lonely, because they believed so hard in love that they tried to bottle it. Modern parallel? Oh, we've got one. These were your guys on Reddit, writing 2,000-word posts about scent theory. Your indie perfumers making love-themed essential oil blends on Etsy. Your data nerds building algorithms to predict attraction based on Spotify preferences and sleep cycles. Hopefuls, all of them, trying to tame something as wild as love with charts and oils. And if you're still awake, still listening, still somewhere between amusement and melancholy, ask yourself, what does it mean that we keep doing this? We keep reaching for tools, logic, ingredients, when the one thing we're trying to touch is chaotic, irrational, and profoundly human, because that's what the lonely alchemists of Athens ultimately teach us. Love isn't solved, it's felt. It isn't brewed, it's stumbled into. It's awkward, it's unscripted, it defies formulas. It is the unpredictable variable. And yet, their efforts weren't in vain. Their notes became the foundation for pharmacology. Their herbs informed early medicine. Their failures were small acts of courage in a world that mocked vulnerability. They gave love their own kind of tribute, one beaker at a time. So the next time someone tries to sell you a love potion made of rose oil, cinnamon bark, and emotional resonance, smile for them. They are, whether they know it or not, walking in the sandals of Hippocrates and Anthem. And while it probably won't work, you'll know exactly where it came from. It's a hot, dusty afternoon in the heart of Athens. The agora is buzzing, not metaphorically but literally. Flies hover over goat meat, merchants shout. Somewhere, someone is haggling over a basket of suspicious-looking figs, but beneath the olives, pottery, and the ever-present smell of armpit, something far stranger is being sold. Well, not love exactly. More like love's ambitious intern with no references and questionable ethics. Welcome to the ancient version of Tinder, the marketplace of Eros. Here, among the carrots and cowbells, you could buy spells, sachets, potions, and powders that promised everything from stolen glances to spontaneous combustion of the loins. This wasn't just commerce, this was romantic capitalism with a side of mildew. Let's walk through it. You pass a stall selling phallus-shaped amulets, carved from ivory and advertised as guaranteed to awaken the lazy serpent. Charming. Next, a woman with 2 teeth and 3 cats offers you soul-binding wine made from dates, myrrh, and something she only calls the sweat of longing. She winks. You do not wink back. Keep walking, and you'll hear it. A raspy man shouting lust powder, for men, women, and confused philosophers. His booth is decorated with dried herbs, lead tablets, and something that smells like roasted onion and old hope. His pitch? One sprinkle under the bed and your beloved won't sleep until they find you. Disturbing, but apparently a bestseller. This was love magic in the open market. Normalized, commercialized, and probably unregulated by any divine agency. There were no dating apps, no matchmaking services, no painfully long getting-to-know-you phases. There was just the hope that a satchel of enchanted fennel seeds might make Leontios from the fish stall finally look up from his squid and notice you. And for many Athenians it worked. Or at least they believed it did. Which in the realm of love is often more than half the battle. Now the actual products varied wildly. Some were wearable, like pheromone pouches stitched from goat hide and stuffed with crushed myrtle leaves. These were hung around the neck or tucked in the armpit to stir desire through scent. Others were edible, like erotic pastes made from cinnamon, fig syrup, and powdered horn, which could be discreetly slipped into a lover's bread. And then there were the more interactive options. One popular stall offered scrolls of binding verses, poetic curses that could be whispered during a full moon bath to make someone long for you with every pulse. The verses came pre-written, with fill-in-the-blank names. Think Mad Libs, but with higher emotional stakes and more goat blood. But perhaps the most famous product was the sandal charm. Here's how it worked. You'd buy a pair of small, enchanted sandals carved from soft wood, each inscribed with symbols invoking Aphrodite and Hecate. You'd place them near your bed, anoint them with olive oil, and say the name of your beloved while standing barefoot between them. The next day, the person you named was said to feel itchy-footed desire. No one knows if it worked, but it sold out constantly. So why was this tolerated? Why didn't the city officials crack down on love potion vendors the same way they policed public drunkenness and poorly tuned liars? Simple. Because the city needed it. Love magic filled the emotional gaps that the law and society refused to acknowledge. You couldn't sue someone for ignoring your poetry. You couldn't legislate attraction, but you could buy a handful of rose thorns soaked in lunar oil and hope the universe picked up what you were putting down. Still, there were boundaries. Some love products were considered too powerful or too creepy, which brings us to the curious case of festival bans. During major religious festivals, like the Panathenea or Dionysia, city officials issued quiet orders banning the sale of love potions in or near the agora. The reason? Let's just say that when people mix wine, ritual ecstasy, and erotic powders, things get complicated. One historian notes that after a particularly wild festival in 428 BCE, 3 marriages collapsed, a temple statue was defaced with honey, and one man claimed he'd been spiritually seduced by a ghost in a sandal charm booth. He later retracted the statement, but only after the sandal vendor paid him 3 drachmae and a fish. These bans weren't moral, they were practical. Love magic disrupted things. Marriages, alliances, dinner parties, and the city preferred its chaos confined to back alleys, not spilling into sacred processions. But even with occasional crackdowns, the stalls always returned, because deep down people wanted to believe that love could be bought, that desire could be summoned, sold, or sprinkled under a pillow, that a stranger in a robe, selling potions from a chipped jug, might have the key to something you couldn't say out loud. So ask yourself, what would you buy if you were wandering that ancient market? Would it be the sachet of lust leaves, the sandal charm, the scroll with your ex's name already filled in? Or would you, like so many others, just pass by, pretending not to look, but secretly hoping that something, anything, might make love a little less impossible? Because while the marketplace may have looked like a chaotic bazaar of snake oil and strange herbs, it was also quietly always a temple of hope. And hope, inconveniently, is hard to regulate. Let's talk about power, and who got to have it in ancient Greece. Spoiler, it wasn't women. If you were female in classical Athens, your job was simple. Be silent, be obedient, and for the love of Zeus, don't cause a scandal. You couldn't vote, own land, or choose your own husband. You were essentially decorative pottery with reproductive capabilities, unless of course you had a little something extra, like magic. Enter love spells. For some women, especially those on the margins, love spells weren't about romance. They were about control. They were the last resort, the Hail Hera, the whispered workaround for a world stacked against them. You couldn't argue with your father, or your husband, or your husband's other wife. But maybe, just maybe, you could influence him with a strategically placed charm under his mattress. It sounds petty. It wasn't. It was survival. Take for example the tale of Philonis of Delos, recorded in bits and pieces across spell tablets and one scandalous comedy. Philonisa was a courtesan, high-end, high-demand, and sick of being tossed aside when her clients found younger flings. So she adapted. She began crafting personalized retention spells, as she called them, mixing herbs, oils, and small tokens taken from her clients. A lock of hair here, a sandal strap there. Her goal wasn't to enslave them, just to gently influence their affections, indefinitely. And for a while, it worked, until she used one on a statesman's son. The man claimed he could feel her in his dreams. He stopped eating. He started writing her name into his legal documents. At one point he tried to commission a statue of her made entirely out of goat bones, which, even by Greek standards, was excessive. Philanis was arrested, publicly shamed, and exiled, not for murder, not for theft, for erotic coercion, unbecoming of a woman. Let that phrase burn itself into your scroll. She wasn't alone. Archaeologists have found dozens of curse tablets, defixianas buried under thresholds, wells, and graveyards. Some written by men, many, surprisingly, written by women. The handwriting varies, some neat and formal, others desperate and rushed. But the message is often the same. Let him burn with love for me. Let her heart be bound to mine. Let him forget all others. These weren't declarations of passion. They were pleas for agency. Because what was a woman supposed to do when her husband took a second wife? When her lover stopped visiting? When her father arranged a marriage to a man who treated goats better than he treated her? She did what she could. She wrote the name, she whispered the spell. She buried the tablet in the earth, and hoped it would grow into something resembling fairness. Of course, magic like that never came without risk. A famous cautionary tale comes from Epizypherian Locris, where a woman named Miriam used a love potion on her unfaithful husband. She mixed wine with powdered hellebore, meant to make him drowsy, pliable, and emotionally available. Instead, he vomited blood for 3 days and accused her of trying to kill him. She was dragged before the city elders. The verdict? Not attempted murder, not assault, but improper use of divine influence. They fined her, publicly shaved her head, and forced her to live among the temple prostitutes for a year, not as punishment, but as ritual purification. Because nothing cleanses a woman like humiliation, apparently. Let that sink in. Men used love spells too. Plenty of them. But when women did it, it was unnatural, dangerous. Proof they were meddling where they didn't belong. Why? Because a woman using magic to influence love flipped the script. It threatened the sacred hierarchy of who chases and who gets chased. And that was scary, especially to a society built on the assumption that women should be pursued, not powerful. Even when the spells failed, the backlash didn't. And they often did fail. Some women reported inverted results where the target became obsessed, then violent. Others claimed the potion worked for a week, until the man moved on, and the spell stopped affecting him. Still others said the potion worked perfectly, but then they realized they didn't love him anymore. There's a tablet found in Corinth with one line scratched into the lead: "Make him love me, unless I change my mind." Poetic, terrifying, honest. And that's the thing about power, especially borrowed power. It's messy, it rebounds, it exposes things you didn't know were waiting inside you. Women weren't casting spells because they were evil. They were casting spells because they were exhausted, because no one listened to their needs, because their futures were determined by dowries and bloodlines, and bad behavior disguised as duty. So they made love into a tool, a trap, a candle in the dark. Did it always work? No. Did it ever work? Maybe. But the attempt, the ritual, the belief, the whispered name into rosewater, was a form of resistance. It was a way of saying, you don't get to forget me. I get to be felt. So the next time someone tells you love spells are silly, remember Philaenis, remember Myrine, remember the nameless woman who buried her hopes in lead and prayed for a little justice. And ask yourself, if no one gave you a voice, what would you whisper into the dark? Still here? Still awake? Still alone in bed listening to a documentary about ancient Greek love potions? It's okay, no judgment. We've all been there, 2 hours deep into obscure history, wrapped in a blanket burrito, questioning our life choices while softly contemplating the romantic potential of powdered goat teeth. So let's take a breath. Unclench your jaw. Wriggle your toes. Welcome to your mid-script emotional check-in. Now ask yourself, honestly, if someone offered you a vial labeled "Guaranteed Love in 3 sips or less," would you drink it? Be honest. Because while ancient Greeks were chugging mandrake wine and burying toenail clippings under moonlight, modern society isn't exactly immune to the allure of romance shortcuts. In fact, we've just rebranded them. Let's take a quick tour through the modern love potion aisle. First up, moon juice. Not a metaphor, an actual product, marketed with phrases like sex dust and spirit dust. It promises to recalibrate your inner goddess using adaptogens, powdered pearl, and probably the tears of stressed-out influencers. The ancient Greeks had Aphrodite oil. We have hormone-balancing maca root smoothies that cost more than a month of therapy. Then there's collagen powder, which, let's be honest, has become the 21st century elixir of eternal youth. It won't make anyone fall in love with you, but it will make your skin glow just enough to feel like maybe, just maybe, your ex made a mistake. And let's not forget the essential oils movement, which is basically witchcraft with a Pinterest board. Diffuse this blend to attract love. Rub this one on your wrists to draw intimacy. Put this oil on your pillow and dream about your soulmate, who is definitely emotionally available and not at all afraid of commitment. Hopefully. But the modern love spell that truly echoes the ancient formulas? Dating app algorithms. Let's talk about that. Swipe left. Swipe right. Apply filters. Adjust age ranges. Uncheck the box that says "Has pet ferret." It's no longer magic, it's math. Behavioral analysis. AI-driven matching. We've digitized desire and outsourced our instincts to servers in the cloud. Ancient potion makers believed love was a force you could bottle. We believe it's something you can optimize, which is both convenient and kind of sad. Because behind every swipe, every curated profile, every I love hiking and tacos bio, there's still a human being quietly hoping to be chosen. Just like the ancient Greek scribbling a name onto a lead tablet and slipping it under a temple stone. You see, for all our tech, we're still painfully analog when it comes to the heart. We still chase symbols. We still assign meaning to small rituals, a good morning text, a saved Instagram story, the way someone says your name slightly differently than everyone else. And sometimes we still buy things, oils, teas, magnetic bracelets, because we want to feel like we're doing something. Like love isn't just luck and timing and the confusing tilt of the universe. Let that settle in for a moment, because maybe the real magic isn't in the potion, it's in the action. The intention, the hope that sits behind it, whispering, try, again. And sometimes it backfires. Ever gone on a date after wearing that new cologne, because the marketing said seductive sandalwood, and all it did was attract bees? Ancient mistake. Classic result. Or maybe you tried that affirmations playlist. I am loved, I am magnetic, I am a radiant being, and all you felt afterward was deeply aware of how silent your phone was. You're not cursed, you're just human. Which, frankly, is far more complicated than being cursed. Curses at least come with instructions. Still watching? Then you know what to do. Like, subscribe, write your crush's name on a sticky note and whisper algorithmic destiny into your Wi-Fi router. Whatever works. And remember, we're not here to laugh at the ancients. We're here because, in some small way, we are them, just with better dental hygiene and slightly more sarcastic coping mechanisms. So the next time you pass a crystal shop, a TikTok therapist telling you to manifest self-love, or a candle labeled Aries love flame, don't roll your eyes. Or do, but then admit it. You want to believe, just a little, because belief is the first ingredient in every love potion. And even if the spell fails, you'll have tried. Which is more than some can say. Alright. Stretch. Hydrate. Maybe pet something. We're about to head back to ancient Greece where people are still grinding up ashes, muttering under their breath, and convincing themselves that desire is just one sip away. Sound familiar? Yeah. That's the point. Let's say you're in love. Truly, stupidly, uncomfortably in love. And the object of your affection isn't responding. Not to glances, not to poetry, not even to the ancient Greek equivalent of accidentally bumping into them while holding 2 amphorae and a goat. What do you do? If you lived in 4th century BCE Thessaly, the answer was simple. You collected their hair, their nail clippings, maybe a scrap of clothing, and you made a spell out of their biological leftovers. Romantic, right? Welcome to Sympatheia, the belief that personal objects carried spiritual echoes of the person they came from. In other words, if you had their stuff, you had a piece of them. Sympatheia was not subtle. It was obsessive, intimate, and a little gross. It was also wildly popular. Practitioners believed that everything a person touched or grew or shed was a kind of magical fingerprint. Hair in particular was powerful, because unlike your social status or political opinions, your hair could be stolen quietly while you slept, or bathed, or visited the gymnasium, which inconveniently was usually nude. 2 nail clippings were next in line. Less romantic, sure, but surprisingly durable in spells. Some texts recommend burning them in small fires while reciting the target's name. Others suggest mixing them with oil and pouring the blend beneath the beloved's threshold. Nothing says please notice me like a foot salad under the front door. And then of course there was spit. Ancient love scrolls mention the collection of saliva, especially after meals, to brew into potions that would bind a person's words to your desires. Symbolic and very unhygienic. The idea wasn't just that the body part held power. It was that it could sympathize, vibrate in emotional harmony with the person it came from. Sympatheia was magical resonance, a cosmic Bluetooth connection between body, spirit, and spell. Imagine trying this today. You're crushing hard. So you steal a hair from your barista's apron, clip a piece of their napkin, whisper to a candle, and bury it under your Wi-Fi router. Creepy? Absolutely. But swap the router for a threshold and the napkin for a sandal strap, and suddenly you're channeling centuries of magical tradition. It wasn't just about romance. Some spells aim to prevent breakups. Others targeted rivals, binding them in confusion, or even redirecting their affections elsewhere. One lead tablet discovered in Boeotia read, "Let him forget her face, her scent, her voice. Let his dreams fill only with me." Intense, and also grammatically correct, which is impressive for a tablet buried with a dead chicken. What's fascinating is how normalized this was. These weren't the actions of fringe weirdos. These were neighbors, priests, spouses, people who paid their taxes and still believed two nails could hold destiny. And women in particular leaned heavily into sympatheia. Because, while society offered them few legal tools, magic gave them emotional leverage. In a world where they couldn't own their own names in contracts, they could etch those same names onto love tablets and bury them with conviction. It's tempting to scoff, to say, why would anyone believe in the power of hair? But let's zoom out for a second. Don't we still do this? Don't we still keep the hoodie? The dried rose? The voice note saved 3 phones ago? Don't we still wear jewelry charged with intention? Sleep with something that smells like them? Save the strand of hair that got stuck to your sweater and pretend it got there by fate, not static cling? Sympatheia isn't dead. It's just rebranded. The modern mind calls it emotional residue. We say energy instead of magic, intention instead of invocation. But it's the same hunger to feel connected, even when they're not looking, even when they've forgotten your name. Let that sink in. We all carry bits of someone else. Memories, texts, favorite songs that still make you ache. And if you believe, even for a second, that those things still mean something, congratulations. You've practiced your own form of sympatheia. Now, of course, things could get out of hand in the ancient world. One infamous case, cited in a Hellenistic-era curse manual, describes a woman named Lysandra who collected not just her lover's hair, but also his sandal dust, pillow feathers, and the ashes from his last pipe. She combined them in a jar, anointed it with pig's blood, and placed it beneath his house upside down. Within a week, the man stopped eating, forgot how to pronounce vowels, and began sleepwalking into his neighbor's granary. Coincidence? Probably, but try explaining that to his family while he's hugging a sack of barley at 2 a.m. And yet, the spell was never blamed. Lysandra was. Her love was called madness. Her devotion? Witchcraft. Because even when the method changed, the fear stayed the same, that someone might know you too well, might possess pieces of you you never meant to give. So here's the question. If you knew someone had your hair, literally or metaphorically, what would you want them to do with it? Burn it? Bless it? Whisper your name into it? And more importantly, whose hair are you still holding on to? We say we don't believe in magic anymore, but deep down, we believe in objects that hold meaning, in photos that carry presence, in playlists that open emotional floodgates. We believe that love leaves an echo, and that maybe, if we listen closely enough, we can still hear it. Even if it's just the soft, awkward crinkle of a toenail clipping tucked into a spell jar. For a civilization obsessed with the cosmos, ethics, and whether chairs are real, ancient Greek philosophers had surprisingly strong opinions about love potions. And by strong I mean violently allergic to the idea that anyone could shortcut desire using herbs and a hymnal. To them, love was supposed to be a moral pursuit, not a cheat code brewed by a lovesick teenager with a mortar and pestle. So let's talk about the real intellectual killjoys of antiquity. Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, and their extended cast of sandal-wearing thinkers who made it their mission to ruin everyone's romantic delusions. First up, Socrates, the man, the myth, the barefoot menace of Athens. This guy didn't just hate love potions, he thought they were cowardly. In his conversations, especially the ones Plato wrote down, and probably embellished, Socrates argued that true love wasn't about lust or charm, it was about the soul's recognition of beauty. If that sounds noble, it is. Until you realize that in practice it meant spending 4 hours talking about metaphysical forms, instead of just telling someone you like their eyes. Socrates believed love was a kind of madness, but a divine one, a gift from the gods. which meant that trying to manipulate it with physical substances was like repainting the Parthenon with goat spit, unwise, disrespectful, and kind of sticky. Then comes Plato, his star pupil and professional vibe killer. Plato doubled down on the idea of ideal love, elevating it to the realm of the intellect. In the Symposium, he paints a vision of love that's not about bodies or potions or, heaven forbid, actual affection, but about ascending toward the eternal form of beauty. Basically, he turned love into a philosophy degree. To Plato, using a love potion to spark desire was like using a slide whistle during a funeral. Technically possible, deeply inappropriate. He argued that physical love was just the starting point, a stepping stone towards something nobler, more enlightened. Something that didn't involve hair clippings or sandal charms or accidentally poisoning your crush with too much saffron. Aristotle, ever the buzzkill pragmatist, took a slightly different route. He didn't see love as a divine madness. He saw it as a form of virtue, a rational alignment of values, friendship, and mutual growth, which sounds very healthy and not at all fun. He considered love to be a partnership aimed at mutual flourishing, an idea that makes sense until you're sobbing over someone who ghosted you after 3 amphorae of shared wine and a bathhouse date. Aristotle didn't believe in love potions, because they bypassed rational choice. To him, manipulating someone's emotions chemically was unethical, a violation of their telos, or purpose. So not only were love spells ineffective, they were morally suspect, like emotional tax fraud. And it wasn't just the big three. Other schools of thought weighed in too. The Stoics believed in self-control above all else. Love was acceptable, as long as you didn't let it control you. They would have looked at a love potion and said, if you need herbs to stir your feelings, you've already lost the battle to passion. Then they would have walked off to quietly stare at a tree. The Cynics? Oh, they were worse. They mocked romantic attachments entirely. Diogenes, yes, the guy who lived in a barrel, claimed he was freer than any lover because he wasn't ruled by desire. He once publicly, let's say, relieved himself in the marketplace to prove that he didn't need anyone, including love potion vendors. But despite all the disdain, people kept using love potions. Because let's be honest, when you're desperate, lonely, and your crush is reading the Republic and ignoring your subtle thigh flashes, you're not looking for ethical approval. You're looking for and therein lies the great philosophical hypocrisy. These men, these critics, lived in a society where arranged marriages were common, women were commodities, and love itself was rarely pure. They spoke of ideal affection while their students passed secret notes and scribbled names into clay like angsty middle schoolers with access to an oracle. Even Plato admitted that physical beauty could inspire the soul. Even Aristotle had friendships that blurred into adoration. Even Socrates, for all his virtue signaling, spent a lot of time talking to very attractive young men under olive trees. So maybe the problem wasn't with love potions. Maybe it was with the idea that wanting love, wanting it enough to mix wine with rose petals and mutter incantations by candlelight, was somehow wrong. Because here's the truth. Philosophers hated love potions not just because they bypassed reason, but because they exposed how powerless even the smartest people were against desire. No amount of logic protects you from heartbreak. No syllogism cures longing. You can quote Plato all you want. If someone doesn't love you back, the ache is the same. Let that sink in. Maybe love potions weren't foolish. Maybe they were just honest. They admitted the mess, the irrationality, the trembling fear of not being enough. They gave form to feelings that philosophers tried to trap in words, but never could. And isn't that the ultimate irony? That the very thing these great minds feared, the wild, emotional, embarrassing attempts at love, might have been the most human act of all? So the next time someone says, you don't need a love potion, just be yourself, remember that advice probably came from someone who's never been ghosted by a poet. And also, maybe they've never tried rose petal wine under a waxing moon. Just saying. Ah yes, when in doubt, blame the gods. If you thought mortals were bad at handling love potions, wait until you see what happens when immortal beings with ego issues and lightning bolts get involved. Because in ancient Greece, desire wasn't just a personal problem. It was often the result of divine meddling, revenge, or cosmic-level pettiness. And nothing complicated a romance quite like a jealous deity with abandonment issues and a flair for transformation curses. Let's start with the basics. The Greeks didn't just believe in gods. They lived with them, in their stories, in their homes, In the ominous way their crops failed, after forgetting to sacrifice a goat, and when it came to love and lust, the divine fingerprints were everywhere, sticky and glittering, and usually accompanied by consequences. First culprit, the original matchmaker disaster artist, Eros. Sure, in modern times we've turned him into a chubby cherub with heart-shaped arrows. But in Greek myth, Eros was less baby Valentine, and more chaotic trickster with a bow and no sense of boundaries. His arrows didn't just make people fall in love, they made them obsessed, deranged, and occasionally turned them into cows. No, seriously. Take the story of Pasiphae, Queen of Crete. She offended Aphrodite, as one does, and was cursed with an unnatural lust for a bull. The end result? The Minotaur. That's right. A god's divine temper tantrum literally birthed a half-bull man who had to be locked in a labyrinth. That's not a metaphor for bad dating decisions. That's just mythological overkill. And Aphrodite? Oh, she was no better. As the goddess of love and beauty, she took any insult very personally. She once cursed a woman named Smyrna to fall in love with her own father, which, needless to say, did not end well. But it did produce a child named Adonis. So silver lining? Then there's Hera, queen of the gods, and undisputed champion of marital resentment. Hera was notorious for turning her wrath, not on her cheating husband Zeus, because what's the point? But on his lovers, many of whom were mortal, and very confused. One myth tells of a woman named Semele, who became pregnant with Zeus's child, after he appeared to her in divine form. Translation: too much sparkle, not enough warning. Hera tricked her into asking Zeus to reveal himself in his true, lightning-flavored form. He did. She incinerated on the spot. Classic god love story. It wasn't just women who suffered. Narcissus, that well-cheekboned disaster, was cursed by the gods to fall in love with his own reflection. Depending on the version, it was either punishment for rejecting a nymph, or just an early warning about what happens when you flirt with everyone and ghost them all. And yes, it was a love curse, the emotional equivalent of saying, "Oh, you think you're hot? Let's see how you handle eternal unrequited self-love in a pond." But why were the gods so invested in mortals falling in love, or failing at it? Simple. Because in Greek mythology, love wasn't sacred. It was a weapon. Something to wield, to punish, to manipulate. You didn't fall in love because of fate. You fell because some deity had a bad day and wanted to spice up their entertainment. And when divine love did happen, it wasn't better. It was worse. Remember the story of Daphne and Apollo. Apollo, god of music and medicine, mocked Eros for playing with weapons. Eros, being extremely petty, shot Apollo with a golden arrow of love, and Daphne, a nymph who wanted absolutely nothing to do with him, with a lead arrow of disgust. Apollo chased her for miles. She ran, terrified, and just as he was about to catch her, she prayed to the gods for help. They turned her into a tree. That's not a metaphor. That's literally what happened. Tree, instantly. And Apollo, he declared the tree beautiful, and wore its leaves as a crown. We don't call that romance anymore. We call that a restraining order, and a very awkward gardening experience. So what do we make of this divine mess? The ancient Greeks understood something about love that we often try to ignore. It's unpredictable, unfair, wild, and sometimes deeply, cosmically stupid. They wrapped that chaos in the faces of gods, so they could blame someone when things went wrong. But it wasn't just scapegoating, it was storytelling with teeth. These myths were cautionary tales, dressed in drama. They warned about the dangers of desire without consent, about pride, about obsession. They said, "You think your love life is messy? Try being turned into a laurel, because a sun god won't take no for an answer." And the best part? The gods almost never learned anything. They kept interfering, they kept causing disasters, because deep down, even immortals couldn't resist stirring the emotional soup. Sound familiar? In the modern world, we've swapped gods for algorithms. Astrology apps, personality tests, quizzes that ask which kind of pasta you own in bed. We want answers, explanations, a cosmic reason why someone didn't text back. The gods aren't gone, we just renamed them and gave them push notifications. Let that settle in. The truth is, we still tell ourselves stories about love. We still blame Mercury in retrograde, still say things like the universe has a plan, or it just wasn't meant to be. Why? Because it's easier than admitting that sometimes love is just people being weird or unready or wildly incompatible. So, the next time you feel cursed in love, maybe you are. But maybe it's not by Hera or Eros or any celestial being with a penchant for drama. Maybe it's just being human. And that's divine enough. Eventually, even the most enchanted wine wears off. The potion dries up. The incense fizzles. The goat blood-stained sandal charm loses its magical luster. And what's left? Regret. Confusion. And in some cases, heartbreak so intense it gets engraved on lead tablets and buried in sacred wells. Welcome to the darker, quieter aftermath of love spells. The ancient Greek breakup scroll. You see, for all the passion and potion making, love in ancient Greece rarely ended cleanly. It splintered, it unraveled, and in true human fashion, people didn't just cry about it, they documented it. On clay, on wax, on papyrus, on metal. These weren't love letters, these were letters from love. Or rather from its smoking wreckage. Let's start with the catedemus, the binding curse. Originally meant to attract love, many evolved into something far more bitter. Instead of let them desire me, it became let them feel the fire of my absence. Or may their new partner grow warts in unfortunate places. Some were subtle, others not so much. One tablet found in Thessaly reads, "As she turned her face from me, let her find only silence. May her mirror show her no beauty, and may her footsteps lead to no affection. Let all her songs sour, poetic, brutal, and more emotionally articulate than half the dating app conversations in existence today." These weren't anonymous either. Many were signed, sometimes with real names, sometimes with pseudonyms like "The One Who Waited," or "He Who Was Enough Until Spring." And yes, that's the original sad Instagram caption. Interestingly, these tablets weren't just venting exercises. They were rituals. To send a curse properly, you had to do it right. That meant folding the lead sheet, just so, piercing it with a nail symbolizing pain, permanence, and probably deep emotional repression, then burying it in a place of power, a grave, a well, a temple floor crack. Think of it as putting your feelings into a mailbox with no return address, and hoping the gods intercepted it before it hit the trash. And yet, not all of these scrolls were bitter. Some were achingly tender. One fragment found in a burial near Corinth reads, "She is gone. I do not curse her. I do not bind her. I only place her name here, because I have nowhere else to say it." Let that sink in, because beneath the theatrics, the wax seals, the ritual scripts, the poetic vengeance, these scrolls are doing what we all still do when our hearts are shattered, trying to make it real, trying to say, "This happened, I loved, I lost, and it mattered." Sometimes the tablets weren't even about others. They were confessions. A kind of ancient journaling, scrawled declarations of guilt, sorrow, or longing. Emotional graffiti that never expected to be read, and yet somehow survived 2,000 years. Imagine burying your breakup note in a cemetery, only for an archaeologist to dig it up 20 centuries later and publish it in a museum exhibit titled, "Curses and Regret, Emotional Damage in Antiquity." Which side note would be a fantastic museum? So how did this practice evolve? Over time, love magic softened. The vengeful scrolls turned into prayers, pleas, even poems. As Hellenistic culture spread and merged with Roman customs, the emotional edges dulled slightly. People still invoked gods, still reached for sympathy through supernatural means, but they also started writing letters. The earliest examples were offerings left at temples, folded notes tucked beneath statues, sometimes tied with string. They said things like "return to me," or "let him see my face in the stars," or simply "forgive me." And if that sounds familiar, that's because it is. We still do this. We text things we never mean to send. We write long notes and delete them. We draft emails to ghosts. We reread old messages and pretend it's closure. Breakups are rituals. They always have been. We need something to do with the grief. Something physical, tangible. Something to mark the before and after. Whether it's scribbled in lead or whispered into your pillow, the urge is the same. To transfer the pain into something else. Something we can fold, burn, bury, walk away from. So next time you find yourself mourning someone who left, remember this. You're part of a long tradition of people who turned their heartbreak into literature, who felt so much they had to carve it into metal, who believed somewhere deep down that the gods might read it, or at least the earth might listen. Because love doesn't end when the person walks away. It ends when we find a place to put what they left behind. And for the ancient Greeks, that place was often a scroll, a nail, and the dirt beneath a temple. Maybe today it's just the Notes app. But either way, the ritual survives. And sometimes, that's the only spell we really need. The wind is soft tonight. It carries salt from the sea, citrus from the orchard, and just a trace of burning myrrh. Somewhere nearby, a lyre murmurs through half-forgotten scales. The moon, round and indifferent, casts light across the tiled roofs and marble columns of a small coastal town, where two figures sit beneath a fig tree. They do not speak loudly. They don't need to. Their voices drift like smoke, low and intimate, carried through the warm air like the scent of rosemary. Between them sits a cup, and in that cup, something shimmers. Wine. Yes, but more than that. It's been stirred with cinnamon, steeped with rose, whispered over 3 times at sunset. A love potion. Not for seduction, not for conquest, but for promise, for connection, for the brief, trembling hope that something shared in silence might last longer than a night. This is not myth. It's not drama. It's not one of the curse tablets buried beneath city stones. It's ritual. And it's far more common than you'd think. Because beyond all the noisy spells and flashy ingredients, ancient Greek love magic also lived in moments like this. Quiet, careful, and deeply human. It wasn't always about manipulating someone into desire. Sometimes it was about making the moment sacred, slowing down, saying, "This matters," without actually saying anything. That's what this chapter is about. The soft magic, the candlelit spells, the ones you whisper to the sea and hope it doesn't laugh. Let's pause there. We spend so much time focusing on the elaborate, the grotesque, the theatrical, but love is often found in stillness. And the Greeks, for all their chaos, knew that too. Their magic didn't always involve grave dust and goat skulls. Sometimes it involved simple acts of intention. A lover weaving a garland for their partner and tying it with red thread. A woman placing a rose beneath her pillow, hoping to dream of the man she missed. A soldier carrying a charm, not to bind someone's will, but to remember her face while away at war. These gestures weren't about control. They were about presence, making love visible, making it tangible in a world that often felt like it was vanishing with every tide. And of course, it always began at night. Because nighttime was when the rules loosened. When eyes met across lamplight and nobody had to explain their feelings in philosophical terms. When incense curled through temple columns and lovers became poets. If only for an hour. The Greeks believed the night had power, not just because of the gods, but because of what it allowed. Vulnerability, desire, truth. The kind of truths that don't fit in daylight. So many love rituals began here. They lit candles and bathed in olive oil. They combed their hair and recited lines from Sappho, that brilliant tortured poet who captured longing in its purest form. They mixed drinks and shared them slowly. No incantations, no nails, just eye contact, just hope. Sometimes it worked. Not because the potion was potent, but because the act itself, the care, the effort, the ritual, made someone feel seen, desired, remembered. That's the real magic, isn't it? Not the herbs, not the formula, but the moment. The decision to make something sacred even if just for a heartbeat. Let that sink in, because while we've laughed at goat bile and sandal charms, while we've unpacked the manipulations and the legal drama of magical love crimes, it's easy to forget that behind all of it were people trying to connect, trying to say "I love you" in a language they didn't yet have. And when language failed, they turned to silence, to ritual, to candles flickering on Aegean terraces, while the waves told stories no one wrote down. It makes you wonder how many of those moments were lost. How many shared cups, how many whispered names into sea breeze, how many dreams scribbled in moonlight. All gone, erased. Because soft magic doesn't leave behind tablets or court cases or temples named after regret. It leaves behind feelings, and feelings fade. But for a while, they were real. And if you've ever looked at someone across a table, unsure of what to say but knowing deeply that something passed between you, you've practiced that magic too. So maybe the Greeks had it right. Maybe love doesn't need a spell. Maybe it just needs space. A moment. A sip. A night. And a little faith that whoever sits across from you feels it too. Because love, for all its chaos and comedy, begins here. A shared breath. A flickering flame. A cup between two hands trembling slightly as the moon watches without comment. Every age has its enigmatic figures. The kind of person whose story survives not through statues or legal records but through gossip, hushed references, scribbled margins, side eyes in symposia. For ancient Greece, that person was Philo the herbalist. No last name, no family line recorded. Just Philo, known across 3 city-states as the man who could brew affection, stir obsession, and depending on whom you asked, possibly talk to plants. His name appears exactly 3 times in surviving ancient texts, once in a fragmentary invoice for root extracts with lunar alignment, once in a warning from a temple scribe, avoid the potion man, with honeyed voice, and once in the opening line of a story that starts, as many bad ideas do, with a noble woman, a soldier, and a truly unfortunate romantic strategy. But we'll get there. First, let's understand Philo. He wasn't a priest. He wasn't a charlatan. He was something in between, a man with too much botanical knowledge and too little interest in human relationships. He lived alone, by all accounts in a stone house near the edge of a forest, where the herbs grew wild and the rumors grew wilder. People came to him not for healing but for hope, and Philo delivered. He didn't promise marriage or passion. His pitch was simpler. My drafts do not force love, they reveal it. It sounded noble. It sounded wise. It also sounded like the kind of thing you say when you're about to ruin someone's life with flower water. Enter Colyanaera, daughter of an Athenian official, rich, sharp, utterly bored. She had her eye on a soldier named Meno, tall, angular, recently returned from a minor war where he developed both a reputation and a limp. He was quiet, dutiful, and completely unaware that Colyanaera existed. She didn't want to seduce him. She wanted him to see her, the real her. The one behind the silks and the ceremonial banquets and the carefully arranged marriages. So she found Philo. According to the reconstructed account, stitched together from a satirical play and an abandoned court document, Colyanaera approached Philo at dusk, bringing an offering of wine, gold, and a letter she never sent. She asked for a potion that would awaken Meno's true feelings, not make him love her, she insisted. Just reveal what might already be there. Philo agreed. He prepared a draft over 3 nights. Wild thyme, crushed figs, red wine, and an infusion of tremoria root, a rare herb said to call forth hidden truths. He instructed her to mix it into shared wine and to drink first, so your heart will open before his does. She followed his instructions. Meno drank. She waited, and for 3 days, nothing happened. Then on the 4th day, he came to her house uninvited, eyes hollow, voice slow. He confessed that he had dreamed of her, not with passion, but with panic. He saw her drowning. He saw himself holding her hand while the water rose, and each time he woke gasping, heart racing. It wasn't affection, it was fear. Raw, intense, protective fear. Not quite love, not quite friendship. Something else, something he didn't understand. She was delighted. She called it the beginning. And then, silence. He stopped coming, stopped speaking. Meno disappeared from the city, reportedly wandering toward Delphi to quiet the visions. No one heard from him again. As for Colyanaera, she withdrew from society, refused all marriage offers, spent her evenings near the coast waiting, they say, for a man who dreamed of her drowning. And Philo, gone, vanished from his house, herbs still growing, fire still warm, no body, no note, just an open vial of tremoria, and a single line scratched into the wall. Some truths are better left sleeping. Now, did this really happen? Possibly not. Ancient storytelling had a flair for drama. The whole thing could have been a parable, or a performance piece from a poet, with a grudge against herbalists. But here's what we know for sure. Someone named Philo existed. Someone crafted subtle, emotional brews. and someone left behind enough of a legend to echo through centuries. And that, in a way, is its own kind of magic. Because unlike most love potion sellers, Philo didn't claim to manufacture desire, he claimed to reveal it. That's what made him dangerous. Not that he manipulated feelings, but that he made people confront the ones they already had. Think about that. What if someone handed you a cup and said, "Drink this, and you'll know what they truly feel"? Would you, even knowing that the truth might be uglier than the lie? Because sometimes we don't want love, we want the illusion of it, the comfort, the choreography, the safe, soft narrative, where we're chosen. Philo shattered that. He turned love magic from fantasy into mirror, and a mirror, especially one that speaks, is rarely kind. So maybe that's why he left, or vanished, or dissolved into legend. Because once you start pulling at people's hearts like threads, eventually the whole thing unravels. And maybe, just maybe, he loved no one. Except, perhaps, silence. There's a shelf, real or imagined, that holds everything we've ever tried to make someone love us. On it sits the dust of mandrake roots, dried rose petals folded into parchment scrolls, inked with shaky declarations, sandal charms wrapped in twine, vials of wine that taste more like hope than grapes, and somewhere, tucked between 2 jars of lavender oil and bad decision, a small bottle labeled "worked once." Maybe this is the elixir shelf. And now, as we near the end of our strange candle-lit stroll through ancient Greek love magic, it's time to ask, what did any of it teach us? Let's be honest. Most of these potions didn't work. Not in the way people wanted. They didn't create lasting love. They didn't guarantee devotion. They didn't turn awkward glances into wedding vows. If anything, they created chaos, obsession, and on a few memorable occasions, accidental goat transformations. But beneath the wild ingredients and whispered incantations lies something deeply familiar. The desire to be chosen. That's what every elixir tried to capture. The fantasy that we might be able to earn, or manufacture, someone's affection. That we could control the uncontrollable. That we could pour something into a cup, and finally stop wondering if we're enough. Let that sit for a second. Because maybe the lesson isn't in the magic. Maybe it's in the impulse. Why do we keep chasing shortcuts to love? Not because we're lazy, but because love is terrifying. It's raw. It leaves us exposed in a world that rewards armor. It's easier to brew a potion than to ask, "Do you feel this too?" It's easier to wear a charm than to sit in silence next to someone and accept the possibility that they might not stay. And that hasn't changed in 2,500 years. We still look for hacks. Just sleeker ones. We swipe and scroll and post thirst traps with motivational captions. We write texts and delete them. We Google how to get someone to fall for you without seeming desperate. We manifest. We moon journal. We schedule FaceTime dates with astrologers. We may have better lighting, but the longing. Same vintage. So what happens when we zoom out? What does the elixir shelf tell us about the human condition? First, we're desperate for connection. Always have been. From temple priestesses chanting in marble halls, to modern-day TikToks about attachment styles and air signs, we've never stopped trying to decode the mechanics of affection. Second, we're creative. We've stirred, spelled, scripted, scented, and simulated love. We've buried feelings in wells and etched them into moonstone. Even our failures are poetic. And third, perhaps most important, we're fragile. Love makes fools of us. It drags us through mud, through temple courts, through midnight markets, through graveyard rituals with hair and lead and nail piercings. It humbles even the proudest. And that's exactly why we try to wrap it in formulas. Because deep down, we know we can't contain it. And still, that's the most beautiful failure of all. So here's what we've learned. Love potions were never about control. Not really. They were about agency. About creating some sense of power in the emotional wilds. For women with no legal rights, for soldiers too afraid to speak, for herbalists in the hills, whispering truths into teacups. It was about finding a voice in a world that didn't offer one freely. Even when the magic failed, the intention remained. I want to be seen. I want to matter. I want this to mean something. And isn't that kind of heroic? Because it's easy to mock old spells and sweat-soaked charms, but harder to mock the people behind them. The ones who dared to believe that they were worthy of love, even if they had to call on gods, ghosts, and goat fat to prove it. So maybe the real lesson is this. There is no potion that makes someone love you, but there is magic in loving someone anyway, in risking rejection, in showing up with a cup, not to trap them, but to say, here I am, once. It doesn't always work, but when it does, it's the best kind of alchemy. No spells, no rituals, just presence, and patience, and the slow unfolding of something that's earned, not extracted. So take one last look at the elixir shelf. It's not a shelf of failures, it's a shelf of tries. Every charm, every potion, every scratched curse. A moment when someone somewhere decided that love was worth doing something about. And if that isn't sacred, well, you tell me. The fire's low now. The candles, once lively, flickering things, have shrunk into soft orange puddles. The spells have been whispered. The potions, sipped or spilled. The jars are closed. The scrolls, tucked away. And yet, something lingers. Not smoke. Not in memory. Because love magic, for all its herbs and rituals and occasional unintentional poisoning, leaves behind something deeper. An emotional residue. A warmth where the spell once lived. A whisper where the name was once said. And if you listen, really listen, you can still hear them. Melite, sitting alone by the coast, waiting for a man who was never hers without the potion. Philo, disappearing into silence after learning the truth, is heavier than any draught. Corleonera, dreaming of drowning. The lonely alchemists, hoping formulas would compensate for the courage they never found. The women, punished for trying to matter. The lovers, still kneeling in moonlight with trembling hands and floral wine, praying for something more than indifference. They aren't characters. They aren't myths. They're echoes of us. Because for all the cultural layers and historical footnotes, this story, all 17,000 words of it, has been about longing, about how human beings, ancient or modern, deal with that invisible weight in the chest, that ache that comes not from absence, but from the terrifying possibility of presence denied. And yes, the Greeks made it theatrical. They wrapped their longing in myth, poured it into wine, buried it with snakes, and lead, and lilac oil. But what else were they supposed to do? Write a sad playlist and overanalyze their text history. They had no smartphones, no dating columns, no couples therapy. They had gods and gardens, curses and courage, and a million small gestures to try and say, I love you. Please don't disappear. Let that settle, because maybe that's why this topic feels so oddly intimate. Not because we believe in potions, though some of us definitely have an attract love crystal we won't admit to owning, but because deep down, we understand what it means to want someone so badly it rewires your sense of logic. And even deeper than that, we understand what it means to be willing to risk something, dignity, reputation, a perfectly good bottle of wine, just for the chance that someone might feel the same. So yes, we laugh at the leaks, the sandal charms, the goat hair rituals, but we also know the truth. They weren't silly. They were brave. They were ancient versions of the same vulnerability we carry now, when we send a message and stare at the screen, or light a candle and wish, or say someone's name in the dark, and hope it still matters. And here's the part that stays with you. Most of the people who tried love magic weren't evil. They weren't dangerous. They weren't trying to dominate or deceive. They were just scared. Scared of being unloved. Scared of being forgettable. Scared of fading out of someone else's story without ever having been a main character in it. We've all felt that. It's what keeps us awake at night, scrolling through memories and maybes. It's what makes us stare at an old photo and say, what did I do wrong? It's what makes us dream of second chances, or at least of being understood. And when that feeling doesn't have anywhere to go, no outlet, no closure, we ritualize it. We encode it in candles and crystals and playlists and whispered names. We cast our longing because it's too heavy to hold by itself. Which brings us to now, to you, sitting or lying there, maybe sleepy, maybe sentimental, maybe wondering what any of this has to do with your life. Well, everything. Because even if you've never buried a spell in a graveyard, you've probably buried your heart somewhere. Even if you've never stirred mandrake into wine, you've probably stirred up a memory you weren't ready for. Even if you've never uttered a curse aloud, you've probably thought, please don't love someone else. And that makes you part of this. This long, strange, beautiful lineage of humans who never quite knew what to do with love. So we turned it into a ritual. So breathe that in. Not incense, not smoke, just the presence of every heart that ever broke, ever reached, ever whispered into the void, hoping it might echo back. That's the spell we're still under. And even now, under modern lights and screen glow and algorithmic longing, that spell continues. Soft, persistent, imperfect, but real. So sleep well, dream weird, and know this: you're not alone. Even if your potion failed, even if your letter never got sent, even if your name was never whispered back, you still cast the spell. And sometimes, that's enough. If this journey left a strange warmth in your chest, or at least helped you fall asleep while learning about ancient heartbreak, go ahead, like, subscribe, and join us again. More forgotten stories, beautiful messes, and weird magic await. Until then, rest easy. You're part of the spell now.